We're happy to announce that we have just launched the Curious Builder Collective. It is a community of builders looking to enhance their brands and businesses by tapping into the collective expertise of the talented builders in the Minneapolis area. It's a forum for asking questions, exploring ideas, and testing theories, all to help refine and apply these insights to your own business. Our group is a supportive community that rallies behind each other. If you're interested, please head to the CuriousBuilderPodcast.com. Under events, you'll find the Curious Builder Collective. We hope to see you there. This episode is brought to you by Helmuth & Johnson, a top Minnesota law firm, ranging from individuals to emerging startups to multinational Fortune 500 companies. Focusing on transactional law, litigation, and appeals, Helmuth & Johnson attorneys are leaders in their field. David Helmuth and Chad Johnson joined forces 30 years ago in 1994 with the goal of creating a premier law firm capable of handling complex and challenging cases efficiently and effectively. Today, Helmuth & Johnson rank among the top 15 largest law firms in Minnesota with more than 70 Twin City lawyers serving clients in more than 30 legal practice areas. They offer a full suite of legal services to clients without sacrificing their original commitment to providing responsive and affordable legal representation. To learn more, go to their website, www.hjlawfirm.com. Today on the podcast, we had Michael Anschel from OA Design, Build+Architecture, and awesome conversation. I had 3 pages of notes. We definitely went off script, but it was really personal, really interesting. I think you're going to enjoy this one a lot, especially the business owners. There's a ton of things that you can apply to your business, kind of level up some of your operations, kind of maybe even step away from kind of the day-to-day. Really talked a lot about how an owner can, if you're looking at the business and working on it, how you can start to see things that if you're in the day-to-day, you really just can't see. And so I found this conversation to be extremely helpful. I hope you do as well. And now, without further ado, on to the episode. Welcome to the Curious Builder Podcast. I'm Mark Williams, your host. Today, I'm joined with Michael Anschel from OA Design, Build+Architecture. Thanks for coming in, Michael.
Happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
So you're in Minneapolis here, same with me. And I think a couple months ago, I met you for the first time. I've been aware of your company because I live in Minneapolis for a long time now. And you were speaking on a Green Path panel with Pat O'Malley and a few others. And I want to have you on immediately because your knowledge in the space of performance enhancement, if you will, to miscoin that term, it's like you're a bodybuilder that you dose on the weekends with EPO but just your knowledge is pretty incredible. And so I want to talk about that today. But before we do, and you're too humble of a guy, so I'm going to brag on you. So I was doing a little research before you came in for the audience that doesn't know who you are. And I'm really intrigued at your path, but I just want to read. I think you have a better bio than maybe Henry Kissinger. So audience, check this out. This is a tall order. But so you, at a young age, were involved with the Guthrie Theater here in Minneapolis. Then you had a passion for the sculpture and the arts. You deferred college. You traveled to China from 92 to 95, where you learned Mandarin. Then you went to Japan to 95 to 96. You were a TV host, a foreign language editor at the university, a preschool teacher, the head of the English department of the Japanese embassy for school in Beijing. And then you came back to get an art degree and a Chinese minor at the U of M. And I'm thinking, like, is that it? So, and by the way, you're a cellist of 44 years. So, I mean, that's crazy. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how this all unfolded, because I have to imagine it shows up in your work all over the place.
Well, I mean, you just laid it all out there. So there,
that's it. Mic drop.
That's all done.
Performance enhancing drugs.
Yeah, you forgot that I actually was supposed to go to Bates College in Maine. I had a full ride. I was going to be a genetic engineer. That was I wanted
for real.
Yeah, for real. I wanted to genetically modify food crops to grow in brackish environments, and I wrote a little thesis on that. And that was where I was headed. And I went to China just to have a little break, like a couple months. Opposite side of the world, the most different place I could think of, and got there and thought, wow, like nothing prepared me for what it really was like, what that country really was like. And so I enrolled in university there and deferred my scholarship. And then I deferred it a second time. And then when I went to defer it the third time, they told me that I needed to show up. And they were going to give the money to somebody else, but that they would hold the scholarship for me for when I was ready to come back. And so I always kind of secretly threatened my family that I'm going to call up Bates College at some point and say, I'm ready.
That'd be great to get an honorary degree. My goodness. So what was it about living in China that sort of, I mean, you had this interesting early career. I mean, tell us a little bit about your involvement in the Guthrie Theater and just your interest in sculpture and art. Because, looking at your website and looking at the work that you do, I can't think of anyone that I know, for certainly not locally, that kind of has the the style that you have in your homes. And I have to believe it's been informed a lot through your experiences.
Yeah. Yes, it has. And thank you. I'm glad, because we want to have a distinct look. But I also think that I used to joke that as someone who wanted to really love sculpture, that I found a career where I would get paid well to sculpt. And the medium is just larger and a little bit more different. But the relationship between form and function, and my background in sculpture was largely ceramics, right? But the ceramics tradition of teapots and all that is always this marriage of form and function. How far can you push the form without damaging the function, right? You don't want to be fully just utilitarian. There's an opportunity for beauty. And I think the same thing is true for homes and the different spaces. And I try to take that approach, like how far can we push the form and still have it be super functional, but also be aesthetically really interesting and really engaging and really unique. And for sure, definitely there's Asian influence, Asian architectural influence in the work. But, the funny thing, Frank Lloyd Wright also, his work is largely borrowed from Japan as well. And so I think that Minneapolis already has a tradition of borrowed architectural styles from the East. So yeah, how was that for an answer?
No, that's great. What do you, it's interesting. My sister-in-law went to St. Olaf and was a sculptor as well. And, interestingly enough, she is not really involved with it. It seems like sometimes people that have and she is different in different ways, but she no longer sculpts. And so, in fact, I had one time offered to, hey, I'll buy you a wheel again. And one of the things that I wanted to do, because I'm a pretty sentimental person, is for every client that we built a home for, I wanted her to create a custom, tableware, plates that was unique to each client. I thought that would have been an amazing way to support her love of the industry. But I think she sort of fell out of it just because sometimes it can be a real grind when you make your passion your job. And so I think, hopefully she rediscovers her way back into it. But, this was before you were in college. So were you actively sculpting in high school? And did your parents were involved, or how did you even get into sculpting?
I don't know. I don't know how I liked clay. I always liked playing with clay. And my parents definitely encouraged me to explore the arts. It was high school. I had this teacher, John Cantor, who, he was one of the, you have these teachers that you remember. They were great for many, many reasons. Happened to be the ceramics teacher, but his philosophy and outlook on life was really the thing that resonated with me. And he would always encourage us to play with the clay. And it was more like a philosophy class that happened to involve clay. And he encouraged me to do post-secondary at the University of Minnesota. So then I studied under Tom Lane and Kurt Hort and Guy Baldwin over there while I was in high school for 2 years. And that's when I did the majority of my sculpture. Because then I was off, in Asia doing other totally crazy different things.
That's so funny you say that. I'm thinking I went to Chaska High School, which is not that far away from where we're recording. But when you said teachers, I mean, to me, it was Mr. Jacobs. He was a shop teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Finnegan was a language teacher, and Mr. Powell, who I ended up later doing some coaching with. But it's funny how these people, 30 years since high school, leave a mark in your brain. And I love the idea that he taught you to play with clay, and it's even kind of fun to say, but like the idea that you're following passion and you're following creativity, and that shows up so much in building. And hopefully if you have a passion for something, it's I think a lot of people that become business owners, you have a passion for something, because I don't think you can continue to be an owner of any company without passion. And I think sometimes when people get burned out, myself included, you sort of have to find ways to reinvent yourself or find a new outlet for creativity. And frankly, this podcast is that for me. About 2 years ago, I was completely burned out of building, and, not really from building, but probably from some of the client experiences. And it was my time to run into a couple of buzzsaws. And now I can officially consult, because I've been through some tougher experiences. But for me, the podcast was kind of the new passion thing that really sort of allowed me to expound on my creativity and the things I was interested in. So it's
That's
cool that
cool.
you started with that and then, turned it around. Tell us a little bit about, before we start talking about building and some of these other things,
Mhm.
a cellist. I mean, that's not a common instrument. I only think of it one time we started this informal book club, but you probably read it, The Cellist of Sarajevo.
No, I've not read
It's a
it.
fantastic
Um,
book. Write that
I
down.
am. You
It's
can't see this, but I'm writing that down.
it's only like 120 pages. It's about a famous cellist that in Sarajevo during the Civil War would go in at night after the bombing. He would go into the middle of the latest crater that was probably still burning or whatever, and he would play his cello in the middle of this war-torn country.
Mm.
I can't remember now because it's been 20 years since I read the book, whether it was a real account or whether it was fictitious. That's a new word. Whether it was fiction or not, or nonfiction, but I've always thought of that and it was this. He gave basically in a time of war, he used his cello to calm the people and speak to the people. It's a beautiful book.
That sounds awesome. So Yo-Yo Ma did something during COVID. He did a bunch of things where he went out and played in public spaces, just as we were all kind of like trying to figure out what to do and what we couldn't do and all that stuff. Yo-Yo Ma did something kind of similar where he went out and played in these big open public spaces
But
in
no
parks.
one was there.
And then people would show up, but it was Yo-Yo Ma. I was like,
oh, that'd be cool.
Best cellist on the planet is just outside playing and smiling. And he really kind of similar message, right? It was music is an international language. It bridges all of the cultures, period. And I fell in love with the cello when I was 5. My parents took me to see Rostropovich play a concert. And I don't remember any of this. I was told that this is what I did. I turned to my mom and I said, I want to do that.
Wow.
And I do remember watching him play, and he's a very animated musician. He leans into his instrument. He kind of moves around. He's very all over the place, like doesn't just sit back in his chair. And I think that amount of energy really excited me. And then my parents said, well, if you want to play that, we'll support that, but you have to commit to playing it for 18 years.
Whoa, that's a big commitment.
It's a big commitment for a 5-year-old. You're like, yeah, totally. I'll do that.
I mean, I can't get my kids to play with their Lego set for like 5 minutes, much less 18 years. Wow.
I was frequently reminded of the promise that I had made, through the many years when I didn't want to play. But then, you turn, like with many, many crafts or businesses, right? There's this initial interest and excitement, and then there's the slog. Right? The hard slog. The instrument doesn't do what you want it to do. The sound isn't beautiful. You're not creating beautiful music. And then there's this moment where you can put the bow on the string and pull, and beautiful things come out of it. And then you get to enjoy it. And I think for me, that's when you get to play. When I think John was saying play with clay, it was like, eventually you're going to it'll just be fun. You're going to have lots of failure. But if your approach is that it has to be perfect on the outset, you're just going to be frustrated.
And it's like that saying, and I'm going to butcher it, but essentially if you do hard things, things become easy. And if you make easy choices, things are going to be hard.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's true of practice. I'm listening to a book right now about Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant, and just, this relentless pursuit that they had at their craft. And, we see the games and we see the winning highlights, but the ruthlessness in which they, this is across all sports, right? It's the Lance Armstrongs, it's the elite athletes, or musicians, whatever it is, to their craft. We see the end result. And I think homes are like that too. I mean, I think people glorify on Instagram, and rightly so, the end result. Mm-hmm. But most people aren't posting the pictures of, someone up to their knees in mud, or the wall that collapsed because it wasn't wasn't done correctly, or you had a cave in, or you didn't shore the the neighboring lot, into just crazy stuff. And so anyway, it's all of that really informs the beauty sort of on the end.
Yeah. And I would extend the metaphor all the way through just general business. There's lots of businesses out there. We pay attention to a few of them, and they tend to be the all-stars of business. They tend to really, they've put in really hard work at building their culture, building their systems, building their process, so that it looks easy, but that came after 20 or 30 years of not easy and working towards refining and continual improvement, right? If we look at like a company like Medtronic that was small and, not not wildly successful. And then they had, I'm going to blank on the name of the CEO who came in and really just worked the company in a very methodical, very careful, very open kind of way, and built this incredible culture of internal leaders that made this company is now one that we all look to and admire.
I've mentioned it many times on the podcast. I first heard it from Ed Engelbrecht. He owns Pella Windows, and he was on episode 1 actually, and he said that culture trumps strategy. And what you just mentioned was, here, and I know I can picture.
I say culture trumps systems, but same idea. Yeah,
and just this culture that if you, and I think it's even with hiring. I heard recently too. It's only because again this book day by Michael Jordan. Someone, I think it was the Houston Rockets that year selected Hakeem Olajuwon because they wanted a center, and the Portland Trail Blazers were going to either pick David Bowie, who no one even knows who he is anymore, and or Michael Jordan, and they called Bobby Knight, who was coaching USA basketball. And back then, I believe it was the amateurs. And so Jordan was there, and they asked Bobby Knight who should he pick? And he said, you should pick Michael Jordan. He goes, we need a center. He goes, well, then put Michael Jordan at center, but you need to draft Michael Jordan. And they didn't. They drafted David Bowie.
Oh, no way.
And the rest is history. But the reason why people are wondering, like, why does this make sense? But it's culture. So he was the culture fit. He was the talent. Figure it out. Systemize, like hire the talent, hire the skill, and then figure out a way after. I don't actually think I've done a very poor job of that over my career, identifying, you think, okay, here's my need, then I go try to find it versus finding the skill and then, figuring out how it adapts to the company or how I can build it even around my messaging. So,
yeah. You asked when we were going into this, you asked me like things that would be useful for people to hear. And we're way out of sequence, but
oh, you mean talking about the 1993 draft pick?
Yeah, well, no. But but that idea, it took me many. This is 30 years of trying this business, right? And it took me a long time to realize, you can't change people. Their strengths are their strengths, and their weaknesses are their weaknesses. But that you build the position around when you find the right individuals, you build a position around the individual and you tap into what do they get excited about? What are they really interested in? And you build the position so that it's 80% of that with only 10 to 20% of the stuff that they don't love. And then you go and you find somebody else who really loves the stuff that the previous person didn't like. And they kind of build on each other then. And then they feel they're able to be supportive. And they can hand off tasks and say, hey, I don't love doing this. I know you enjoy doing this. Can you step in? And it's it makes a much more cohesive family type network.
I mean, when you're describing that originally, it sounds like you're almost, you were using a business, but your ring was up and I was like, that's like a marriage proposal, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're picking like, who do you want to build this team around? I mean, there's so many relationship examples between building a home because it's so personal. I mean, the work that we do, there's very few careers where you're as personal with people. You're in their lives, their kids. I mean, things that most people don't know about them. I mean, I've interviewed clients before, and I mean, one of my first questions will be, especially if it's like a young family, like, are you planning on having children? And if so, have you discussed how many?
Yeah.
And it's like, I've had it before where a client actually told me they were pregnant. And I said, have you told your parents? And they said, we just told them yesterday. So I'm like, wait a minute, I'm like number 3. And like, it's a guy they've never even met before. Right. But the point is, it's really personal.
Yeah. And sickness. I mean, we had a fantastic client. Her mother, her father passed away, and then her mother had a stroke and an aneurysm. And they came to us like, we got to figure out, like, mom's in the hospital, but they're going to let her come home, and we got to figure out how to care for her and build a space that will support her. How do we add to the house single family living, but also it's got to be fully like ADA and supportive, and at the same time can't be exposed to anything, right? It's just fragile. Like, you're working with people who are oftentimes going through crisis, and you get to be this, like, I think it's awesome. Like, what a great place to be called in to help people when they're truly in a time of need.
We just heard a story, and it just happened to be my dad. I had my dad on over Christmas, and his episode was, I don't know, 5-6 ago. And he told a story that I had never heard before, where it was someone was using their life insurance policy to pay for the build. And if the husband didn't pass away, they couldn't afford the build. and he didn't mean it as a joke, but he said he passed away right on time, so the home could be. But they knew about it. But like,
Yeah.
talk about emotion.
Yeah.
My good, I've never heard one quite like that before.
Wow.
And so they used the payout to pay for the house. And I hope no one else has to ever go through something quite like that. But I think they would have felt a lot. I mean, can you imagine how personal that house would have meant to that surviving wife and their children? Like, that would have been pretty powerful. Like, our dad, in many ways is the foundation that this house was built on. I mean, it's a pretty powerful story.
Yeah. Yeah. And the experience, it's not an object. I mean, I think, yes, the house is a physical object, but it isn't an object, right? It's imbued with experience and emotion. It's where we have the most intimate moments of our lives, right? And you're involved in creating or modifying that space with them, and that experience of creation with them. You are part of that. And there's a huge responsibility that comes with that, which is maybe my biggest challenge with the people in our industry who approach this as some sort of a battle or a fight against the consumer, or where the consumer, and don't realize that this is you're there to guide them. You're their advocate to guide them through a process. It's a huge role to take on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think too, both of us remodel and build new, and there's pros and cons to both. And I love both. And it's, just as a craft, I like it. There is something different about I'd be curious to ask your thoughts on this. Well, actually, before I bias you, how would you describe a remodel client as a stereotype compared to a new home client? Have you thought about like the personalities in terms of,
so if it's, I mean, so I think that I'm going to add a distinction: new home custom for a client versus new home spec, because this new home spec has no client.
Agreed.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. Let's do that.
Yeah. And new home custom is lots of decisions to be made. But they're all being made without a thing that exists. And so you're working with a lot of ideas, and it tends to be harder for them to envision, and harder for them to feel solid. And during construction, there can be, oh, I didn't realize that, right? But also a little more removed. They're not living through it. They're not in it. And in some ways easier to manage. Remodel, super personal. They've lived in that space for some time. They feel the house shake. We encourage them to move out, because it's traumatic to feel your house shake like that. And everything is precious, and it's much more delicate. The amount of time that I put into an estimate for client management on a remodel, maybe 5 or 6 times that I would put into management of a client for its new construction, or where they're not living in the space.
I've never heard it described like that, but I understand what you mean. My
what were you gonna? Yeah, what was yours?
So here was mine. I think a new home is more aspirational, and it's a dream, right? They're trying to build something that they don't have, that doesn't exist. And to your point, a lot of them can't envision it. In some ways, it's easier, but the expectations are so much higher, in the sense that I try to not dissuade, but educate. For one thing, there's no such thing as something that's perfect. And so, I right away, actually, usually in the first meeting, I'll do this analogy about, trucks coming off an assembly line, and, whatever. And there's still callbacks on them. I mean, you're building a one-of-a-kind house outside in the elements. It's amazing we get as much right as we do.
True.
I think a remodel client, the expectation, because I laugh, because like, no matter what you do, even if you're a terrible remodeler, it's still going to be better than whatever they had. Unless you're doing, okay, you're going to disagree with me. It should be. But my point is, the bar is really low. Like, you're there to, expand the kitchen, or do a new kitchen, or, now I get if you go into the restoration stuff, that's a different conversation. I haven't done a lot of work there, but, usually, you're coming in, you're fixing, you're doing an addition, creating space. There's no bathroom on the main level. I mean, my point is like, you are solving some major needs. And I feel like when people have lived in a home, you're solving something that's pretty critical to them, and they're like, oh, they're so thankful. Yes. I feel like the thankful, not that people that you build a new home aren't thankful, and maybe I shouldn't compare them, but I guess I am
It's
going
no,
to.
it is. It
I
is
feel
different.
like the depth of their thankfulness is on a deeper level because they've lived in this space. They've had memories that are already there.
Mhm.
And sometimes there's some really cool sentimental things that we can either keep or accentuate or honor so that it's there. And I want to. That's part of the story of that home. Maybe the people they bought it from, and because not everyone we remodel from are the original owners either.
Right.
Sometimes, we'll someone will be coming in from out of town or whatever,
Well,
moving.
the house is 100+ years old, right?
Right.
So you're third, fourth, fifth, sixth owner sometimes,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. So anyway, that's
Yeah.
just, that would be my perspective on some of the personality traits. I think
Yeah.
a remodel client tends to be easier to please as a general rule.
So it's such an interesting. Yeah. I was thinking while you were talking, and I was listening, trying not to think at the same time and just like hear it all. But then I thought, I just 2 weeks ago got an email from a client that we remodeled their basement, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago. And we put in a stage, like they had a tall ceiling basement. And this is a Minneapolis home. So it was rare that we have high ceilings. We remodeled their basement, put in a stage. And it was, I think, the third or fourth remodeling job that we had done for them. And they wrote this really sweet short email the other day just saying, during COVID, when we were at home, the basement was the sanctuary and the stage got so much use. And we thought about you guys every day. And I just had to send you a quick note to say thank you. That kind of connection. And it's not the first one that we've gotten from a client from 10+ years ago where they come back and they're like, hey, this was really meaningful and valuable to us.
I think that's amazing. That they would contact you and even share that, because it would mean a lot to you specifically, and especially when you think back. And I like it when they send you. I love getting the Christmas cards. I think that's my favorite thing about being a builder is getting all the Christmas cards and seeing these families, and a lot of them are on the front porches or they're in their living room.
Yeah,
and
the
so,
spaces you created for them.
Yeah, and I think that's super empowering.
Yeah, I was going to make a comment on the remodeling side that I think I find more difference in the price point and the client that comes with the different price points.
Give me an example. I'm not following you.
It's dangerous waters here. A buddy of mine used to say for them, when they interviewed their clients, the first thing they would ask is if they had kids. And if they had kids, they knew that the remodel would go pretty well. And if they didn't have kids, they knew that it was going to be a little bit harder to get through that process. If you've had kids, you've had a messy house, you've had chaos, you've been through it, and if you haven't, I always think of the National Lampoon Family Christmas where there's the
yeah, the family next door.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they can't tolerate anything, and everything is pristine and perfect. And if you're looking to live like that, then remodeling is chaotic and difficult. But I've also found that our clients who work for a living are super appreciative of the people who work for a living as well. And our clients who are in the other end where money, they have more of it, let's just say, can sometimes be more difficult. They can be more demanding and less understanding than those who, they know where every dollar comes from and where it goes. But they're the most generous. They're the ones who are more or less likely to, bake cookies for the electricians or leave some sodas out. And it's very, very different experiences.
I think it's interesting. You touched on, I agree with a lot of the things that you shared. I think it's interesting because I think the humanity is really important. And I think if you're in a remodel, and I do whatever I can to ensure that the couple is not in the home or their family is not in the home because it's so disruptive. And I know, and I say, guys, we had a COVID baby and remodeled our house and lived in a VRBO while we delivered a baby and it's a terrible idea. I'm telling you, this is terrible. Listen to me. You're paying me money for my opinion. I'm telling you, move out.
Yeah.
And so, but people do it, man. People try so hard to stay into their home. And, sometimes, you have to play the safety card, which is true safety, but also, the lead-based paint stuff and something. It's just not a good idea on so many levels. The home will take longer. It'll be more expensive. You will dislike your remodeler more to some varying degree because you're there every single day. And everyone who remodels knows what I'm talking about. No matter what the schedule says, there are times where someone won't be there that day. Unlike a new home, you're just not there watching them.
Yeah.
it's the same process, but you're
Mm-hmm.
held to a higher standard. So
Mm-hmm.
there everything's pros and cons. I guess what I was going to mention you, it's you had mentioned about, oh, the humanity baking cookies. I had one client, her name is Sandy. We built 2 homes for a remodel, and then she built a new home a couple years later.
Cool.
And she used to make like Benedict Arnold's, or not Benedict Arnold's, like
Eggs Benedict?
Eggs Benedict. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, see, you already know what I'm talking about. Benedict Arnold. It's funny because actually a friend of mine just wrote a book about Benedict Arnold that I'm reading, hence why that Freudian slip there. So she would make them Eggs Benedict, my framers. And I said, Sandy, I love it, but you got to stop. They're never going to work for another person ever again. And these framers were just constantly saying, oh, we love Sandy. She's amazing. And it does make a difference. A hot day. I've had clients bring out, a cooler full of popsicles,
Mm-hmm.
ice cream
Mm-hmm.
treats, cold drinks. I mean, they're working so hard on their home, and I love it. Means a lot to me. It's a little bit like the kid example. If someone comes up to me and says, your kids are amazing, you're like, ooh, you get this huge elated high, right? Because you love your kids. Someone else is showing you that you love their kids. It's a little bit like the trade partners. When someone comes up to you and be like, I really appreciate Todd, your trimmer. His attitude's amazing. Or Rich, your cabinet maker. He does an amazing job.
Mm-hmm.
It really, to me, it does 2 things. It makes me like that client more to another level, because I'm like, they're taking the time to tell me that they're not nagging on something. They're like passing along, like, you let him know I really appreciate the work that they did for me. And
everyone works harder for that person as a result.
100%.
Right? If they do those things where they show appreciation, then the time when they come and they say, hey, that one spot over there,
you're gonna
no problem.
No problem.
Done.
I gotcha. 100%.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, it's a people thing for sure.
But you keep saying people and humanity, and I think, again, like, big takeaway, it's not a transaction. It's not an Amazon purchase. It is a long engagement. It's a very long engagement. If you're we have design, it can take up to a year to go through that whole process. And then we've got construction, which could be 3 months. It could be a year, it could be a year and a half. That's a long time to be in a relationship with somebody. But if you start not treating them like part of your community, and you start treating them like a checkbook, and they start treating you like you're just a robot then it's bad.
This episode is brought to you by Adaptive, the software for builders that automates draws, budgets, and bookkeeping with AI. For over a year now, I've been partnered with Adaptive, and they've just been an amazing game changer in terms of efficiency in our time and all our bookkeeping. From the time we get an invoice, we import it into their system. The AI codes it, cost codes it, job codes it. All we have to do is review it, pass it through the people internally in the office, all digitally, and then it gets approved and paid all via ACH. It's becoming extremely fast and saving us countless hours a day and a week. When it comes to draws, all of our budgets now are set in Adaptive as well. So now when we cost code against the draws, we can do our change orders, and then with a click of a button, we can submit these draws to our title companies or to our homeowners for faster payment. If you're looking to save time, and if you're looking to be accurate, I highly recommend Adaptive. Additionally, if you'd like to listen to one of their founders share the story of Adaptive, you can listen to episode number 15 on the Curious Builder podcast.
This episode is brought to you by Pella Northland. For 19.5 years, I've been building homes, and 95% of all of my homes have used Pella windows. I couldn't be happier to call them a partner in our builds and our remodels. Whether you're an architect, a designer, or a remodeler, I'd highly recommend Pella windows. They can fit old homes, new homes, reclaimed, commercial, and really everything in between. Pella is a company that we trust and that we recommend to our clients. Additionally, in management, Peter and Ed have just been absolute fantastic people to work with, as well as mentors to me personally. So when it comes time to look for a window, I'd highly recommend Pella Windows. Find more at pellanorthland.com. Also, if you're interested, you can hear episode 1 where I interview Peter and Ed together for a great listen on business and Pella Windows. And I want to kind of dive into some of this, but we left off, we got on a sidetrack here.
It was a good one, though.
It was a wonderful one. I enjoyed it. So you came back. How did you get into building? Did you start? So the original name was Otagawa Anschel.
Correct.
And now it is OA Design Build Architecture. Walk us through how that started. And
sure. So I came back to the States at the end of 95 and was going to go back to school at the University of Minnesota, and picked up a part-time job at the Linden Hills Co-op in the perishables department.
No, very well.
And a friend of mine who was a musician came in one day. He's like, hey, I need, $20 cash. You want to help me out? I got some handyman work. And I was like, oh, $20 cash sounds pretty good. Sure. So I was doing a little handyman work, and wonderful person, wonderful musician, great friend, terrible business person. And I learned quickly like what not to do. And I'm a little competitive, and I thought, I could do this a lot better. And so I started my own company, and I hired him briefly.
So you immediately started. So you had one bad example. You're like, you immediately started a company.
Kind of like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. This is amazing. Awesome.
I started a company while I was in China as well.
Totally logical.
Yeah. Totally logical. And it grew from restoration work, which I really enjoyed, into remodeling work, and then into design and construction, and then into architecture and construction. So it hasn't followed a path, and I didn't set out to build a design build company. It was more working with my hands, and being outside felt good, and I was enjoying it, and I was enjoying working on these, the Queen Anne's, and restoring moldings and plaster, and keeping the jobs interesting and exciting. And every time I would start to get a little bit bored with what I was doing, I would set my sights on like what I thought was the next level. In fact, I was on a project in Kenwood. We were painting their house, beautiful, beautiful house. And they were moving in, and I was doing all this painting, and I saw on their kitchen table, they had a brochure from Voyevich, and Voyevich has been around a little longer than we have. And I thought, oh man, they didn't call me. And they were planning an addition. I hadn't built an addition. Why would they even ask me about that? Right. But I immediately set my sights on that. Well, we got to be the next Voyevich. And so it became kind of and by the way, Peter Voyevich and I are great friends, and we go skiing and snowboarding together. And, but it grew in that evolution. And so there's no logical path that I can say, like, it wasn't what it should be when you start a business. It took me 15 or so years to sit down and say, I need a business plan. I need to write out my mission, vision, value statements. We need to give ourselves purpose.
It seems like most companies, as I've interviewed people, very few people have a prescriptive path.
Yeah.
Almost all of it is following their passion, their creativity, competition. I mean, in that sense, I love that story that you're painting. And you see this brochure, and you're like, oh, well, I can do that. Why would they not call me? I'm like, I don't know, because you don't have a website, because you've never done one.
Yeah.
But why would we let that get in the way? Like,
yeah.
And so I find that, I think there's a lot of value in planning. That being said, I think there's more value in passion and energy. And obviously the best combination is a little bit of both. But I mean, if you don't, we used to always argue, my cousins and I would always argue. And the argument was, actually, I'll ask you the question.
Sure.
What is harder, to dream or to achieve?
Silence on a podcast is a bad thing. Is it harder to dream or to achieve? I mean, I feel like it's a trick question. So,
it is. But that's based on my logic. It doesn't make it right.
Achieving is and isn't hard. Achieving your dream may be hard. Like, I'll as an example, right, to make sense of that, what I think I said. So if I wanted to be rich, and the goal was achieving wealth, pretty easy to do, right? If I wanted to sell window siding, roofing, I could do that, and we would have more money. But I don't think there'd be a lot of happiness involved with that. You could go be a financial planner. I don't know. There are lots of paths towards wealth that just require that you do the task, and you do it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And there's a path. And then there's the crazy dreams that you have about what you could do. And I could create the Green Star program is a good example of, like, well, let's create a green building standard. And then let's spend 3 years and hundreds of hours trying to build a standard, right? That's really hard work. Easy to have the dream, hard to make the dream real if it's a good dream. Yeah.
I think it's a great response. I don't think there's a right answer.
Mm.
My answer, and one that I still believe, is that if you don't dream it, what is there to achieve? And like, it's a little bit like, those famous things, like, if you, like, the things that you write down happen. And so like if you don't write it down, it's less likely to happen. So they've correlated all these, brilliant people, like, or successful people, whatever you wanted to, whether it's a Steve Jobs or a, Elon Musk or a Rockefeller or whoever, but you look back at their journals, their notes, they actually wrote things down that they wanted to do.
Yeah.
And then later on they achieved them. Sometimes you write stuff down and you lose track that you did it, and later on you do it and you forgot you wrote about it. So the point of it was just like dreaming it. And I guess where I was going at this of having a plan is super helpful, but having the idea and then supported by the plan is ultimately the best plan. But anyway, the whole point is just to free people up to dream. Actually, I wasn't planning on sharing. Well, I wasn't planning on sharing most of the stuff we're talking about. But here's an interesting one. You should play with your staff. I did it with my staff over the holidays, and it's something that my dad did with me, and I still do it probably every couple of years, and I find it really interesting. And the whole point of the exercise is to get people to think outside the box. And people always talk, oh, if I had a lot of money, and we've often said, okay, what are you going to do with it? Because most people have not thought about. They only want it, but they're talking about the achieving, but they're not talking about the dreaming side. So the challenge to that is usually it works really well when you set get a sandglass timer. And I like the time to be shorter. So say 7 minutes, no more than 10. And we set the budget at 500 million. You get a pencil and you go spend 500 million in 7 minutes. Most people have a really hard time doing it.
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating to watch what people spend it on, because you're talking about a massive amount of money. That's
hard to spend.
It is. Yeah. Unless you get started. Once you've done it a few times, you can get really creative. I have $10 million homes all over the country, all over the world. I mean, so you can start being ridiculous. Anyway, I only bring that up now of challenging your mind, and whether it's your art, or I know you're an avid outdoor enthusiast, resetting your mind however you do it, whether it's exercise or literature or reading or conversations or whatever it is, it helps inform you in your job, whatever it may be. Maybe, I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, you're likely in the construction world, but if you're not, welcome and become a builder.
It's a great job.
Yeah, it's great. And so anyway, the whole point is just to keep on kind of exercising your brain and seeing, because there's so many things inside of you that you don't know. And sometimes you needed the brochure of Voyevich to be like, oh, I can level up my business. And I think that's what's really helpful. It doesn't come out of, and competition's great when it's harnessed correctly. It doesn't usually come out, in my experience, it usually doesn't come out of envy, or it's like, I find a lot of encouragement from my peers. And I do think, like, social media to me is extremely powerful motivator in a good way. I think you have to be careful that doesn't become toxic, obviously, and you're not always comparing yourself to other people in a negative way. But like, I love to see what other people do. I'm like, that's amazing. I want to try that.
So yeah, what you're describing to me, what I'm hearing is possible. Like, so when I looked at that brochure, it wasn't, oh, I want to crush them, right? That wasn't. It was, that's possible. No, I mean, there's plenty of room to play in this. But it's more like, that's a possible thing.
Yep.
Right. And when we see that social media content where someone creates something like, okay, knowing it's like that, what is it? The first person who ran like a 6-minute mile.
Yeah, Roger Bannister wrote a 4-minute mile. And then within the year, 7 people, I think within a couple months.
Right.
And we don't know any of their names.
But it was, once someone did it, it became possible. And so it was doable.
That's a great example.
And I think so much, if you look for inspiration, if you look at people who are successful, or companies that are successful, and you say, okay, well, it is possible to be successful in this thing, or it is possible to build a business that is fully transparent, or it is possible to build a business that does green building, or that does super niche, whatever, right? Knowing that it can be done is half the battle. Because
I 100% agree with you. I think that's amazing. So what would you say is your superpower now? I mean, now if you develop, because you've been 28 years, 30 years, how long have you been?
This is year 30.
You're 30. I mean, walk us through some of your milestones in your career. I was actually on someone else's podcast earlier this morning, and they asked me a question like, at what point in your career do you feel like you've changed levels? And it got me thinking. I think, for me personally, I think there's been maybe 3 or 4 sort of glass ceilings, if you will, that you sort of bust through, and it's kind of messy and bloody on the way through. And then all of a sudden you're at another level. I guess your journey, if you were to look back now, what do you think were some major things that sort of took you to another level, to where you are now?
Getting myself out of the field was a major level.
Oh, sorry. I'll write them down and then we'll get back to some of them. Go ahead.
Getting myself out of the field and then getting myself out of running production and then getting myself out of designing everything and then getting out of the way.
That's amazing.
Those are major moments. Layered on that, our first edition is a vivid memory for us. I had the Journal of Light. I had never built an edition. Told the client we could do it. I think they knew that we had never built an edition. Went to the library, did a lot of reading. I had the Journal of Light Construction handbook on the job site along with a couple other books, and we were hand framing this edition with bird's mouth rafters. And the building inspector walked on site for inspection, and I was like, "Oh, the books are sitting out there. I got to quick hide them." And he saw them, and he saw the books, and he said, "This is the first job site I've been on where I've seen someone looking to the experts on how to do this." And that building inspector became one of our close friends, and I realized inspectors are your friends and someone to lean on. And that was pivotal in changing how we thought about the other trades and building an integrated design approach or integrated building approach where we bring everyone in and we try to get our HVAC and electrical to have a conversation in the office over the drawings, utilize everyone's knowledge instead of needing to be the smartest people in the room. And then I think last milestone, most recent milestone would be slowing down and not chasing, and being not trying to grow. Maybe that's the better one to say. We made a decision a couple years ago about the size of the company and what we want it to be. And I had heard all of, through life, you got to grow, otherwise you're dying. It's not true.
You're very much alive.
You're very much alive. And actually, the people who said that their businesses have long since disappeared. You can very much find the space where your culture is good, your rhythm is good, your tempo is good, and you actually play really well in that and be that thing and get okay with that. And that was a big one. I think getting okay with, hey, look, we're 4.5 million, and that's a great place to live.
I feel like you could write a philosophy based on what, I don't know if you were intending to say this, but as you said it, it's very rhythmic. Out of the field, out of production, out of design, out of the way. We'll have to come up with a way to say out of slowing down or whatever, because we got the five O's.
Out of the race.
Out of the race. Yeah. And there you go. I think it's really mindful of what you're sharing. We'll dive a little bit into this. And just to give us context, how big is your company now?
So we are 12, 13 people.
Okay.
When we vacillate kind of between 10 and 14, depending on the economy and internships and stuff like that.
Talk to me a little bit about self-performing. I'm guessing you self-perform a little bit of framing, some trimming, or what are you self-performing with that? I assume you're self-performing with that number of people on your staff.
I try not to perform.
Yep.
I try not to do anything.
Yep.
We have 4 carpenters. So that do framing and trim.
You mean your awesome carpenter, your studious carpenter, and your ninja carpenter? I love you. Your naming was excellent. I like that.
We tried to have fun with it, right?
Yeah.
And then we have design and architecture in-house. So, but that's the extent of what we see self-perform. Like, we don't have an electrician on staff. We had a tile setter on staff once.
Yeah. That's a lot of tile to do.
Yeah, and there's pros and cons to having things in house. You technically can make a little more money on the front end, but then you're warranting more, and it's your work on the back end. And tile happens to be a high warranty callback thing, and so turns out that was a really dumb move on my part. I haven't stopped making mistakes, that for sure. continue. That
just tells me you're still alive and you're a human. So how did you walk us through? I think we'll spend the rest of the podcast. I had a whole nother, well, you got 2 pages of notes I want to talk about. We're gonna have to bring you back in to talk a little bit about energy efficiency and your green path. But this is too interesting to stop. Tell me a little bit about, because I think a lot of people listening, and myself as well, I was never in the field. I'm not a handy person. So my next one is going to be out of production, but let's take each one of these as maybe 1 or 2 things that you noticed and what it took for you to get out of each one, and some of the things that looking back you can say you give some perspective on. So one of them is out of the field. How did you know you needed to get out of the field? I mean, a lot of builders are very talented, and I've heard this saying, which really applies to almost everything you're saying, which is if you're working in the business, you have a job, and if you're working on the business, you have a career or you have a business. And so I think a lot of us, myself, it's like a Louisville slugger over the head. You're like, oh man, I have a job because I'm working in the business and I need to spend time working on it. So, and I guess with that perspective, how did you know it was time to get out of the field, and how did you do that?
I'm going to add a third piece to your list, and the third is I own the business, and that's totally different as well. So I got out of the field mostly because it hurt. Working in the field is hard, and I was doing drywall and concrete and digging and framing, and my body hurt, my hands hurt. I was going to shiatsu 3 times a week and the chiropractor twice a month just to stay in healthy. But I also wasn't able to respond to clients appropriately. And then there's this fear when you hire people to do the work that they're not going to do it the way you would want it done. And so then from there you develop this is my brain, this is how it works. Okay, so I have to develop standards and protocols for this is how we do a particular thing, and then teach that to the people you bring on.
Did you write it down like a standard of operating procedure, or was it something you told them, or how do you describe that to the next people?
That's a fantastic question. Sometimes written down, sometimes described, sometimes demonstrated. Now, of course, we have drawing, we have all of our section details, and we have all of our standards, and we have all of these things written into our descriptions. But we are always working on refining that so that we can more clearly communicate between the office and the field how we want something executed. I do a lot of work these days with protradecraft.com, which is a website that has a lot of training videos on how to do installations. And it's been a lot of fun to go back out in the field with my guys and have them walk through and demonstrate on camera how we should be flashing windows or how we should be installing our building papers. And then to have that content be available so that if you have somebody new coming on, they can watch it being performed, right? And that other companies can then look to that and see, oh, okay, that's how it should be performed. And if you don't speak English or Spanish or whatever your language might be, you've got a visual, like you're watching someone perform the installation. So that's lots of ways to communicate how. That's actually what makes human beings extra special, is that ability to pass on information and build off of that. And then mostly, maybe the piece to add would be it is difficult, and it's not going to be the way you did it. But if you hire people who are better than you, who intimidate you, that's usually a good strategy, because they bring more to the table than you did. And so that became part of the strategy, was like, hire carpenters who make me look bad. Right. That's way better for the company. And hire designers and architects who can draw circles around me, and hire people, our general manager is a much better communicator and understands people and likes people way more than I do.
That's so awesome.
So Al Trellis, I got to give Al Trellis credit for that one. I saw him in a lecture once, and he said, totally inappropriately, I'm not going to say it, but he said basically you need to hire people who are bigger than you and stronger than you and more intelligent than you.
I mean, it seems like a lot of people that are successful, that is the approach that they understand, because they understand that really nobody can build a company alone, nor who would want to, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's the opposite of the Steve Jobs approach, right? Who is all ego. This is, check it at the door, right? It just has no business. Ego has no business in the business.
Yeah. That was out of the field. How do you get out of production and out of design and sort of out of the way? I find that, this is advice for myself, is like, I've reached the point where, I'm in the visionary seat, and I like sales. I like those things. I mean, I would say operations would be, you mentioned before about the 80-20 rule. Find someone to do the 20% of the things that you don't like to do.
Mhm.
And that's their 80 rule. Right. And so I know what I need sort of to find, but what was your 20%? What was the thing that you didn't enjoy that you had to hire to sort of, get to this next level, get out of production, get out of design?
So I think it changes over time, and it becomes the thing that you resist, right? Wherever the company would bottleneck, first of all, if that was a thing, we had to explode, right? And so it became quickly like, keep things off of Michael's desk, right? That's where things,
They just sit. That's where
that's
they
where they go to
die.
die. And you probably want, some clients want to work with Michael. Great. Heads up, it's going to be different than if you worked with one of the other staff. Just that's, if you want to sign up for that, but enter at your own risk, right? Because Michael's going to be here and he's going to be there, and I don't deliver as well as my team does. So I think it was more like, recognize each of those places, and then blow it apart. And the biggest piece in that is, after you do it 2 or 3 times, it's okay. But the first couple of times was that giving up of control, and being okay with it, and being okay with having things not necessarily work out, and maybe losing some money in the process because mistakes were made. And it's easy to walk in and be mad about it and say, "Oh, I would never made that mistake," but I would have made some other mistake. And good employees only make that mistake. They'll make it once, and then they won't make that mistake again. And so
I had someone that I listen to quite often has shared before an interesting concept that if you can find someone to do your job within 60% of your efficiency, you should hire them. Which is a hard thing for most owners to think. Like, man, 60% is a 40% fail. And then his comment was, they can't stay at 60%.
Yeah.
But if you're not going to allow people to fail, you will fail.
Yeah.
And I think that's really valuable advice. As you try to hire people. And I don't know if I don't think I've done a good job, or I have not done a good job with that. Not that I don't trust people. I just don't think I do a very good job I think I'm an optimist, which makes me a very good remodeler, makes me a terrible evaluator of people. Cause I'm like, oh, they're going to be amazing. Oh, they can do a great job.
Yeah.
And like, I'm just not that objective. I think I like people too much.
So I'll add to that one. The other constant, right? Well, the constant in life, right, is change, right? Everything in the universe is destined to change, and everything is right on schedule, right? That's it. Period. So whoever you hire, and you've assembled the perfect team, something's going to change. Someone's going to leave. Something's going to happen. You will never have the perfect team. You will never get to step back and it'll all just run smoothly. That's it. And this, knowing that, we have an expression in the company. We say, no sacred knowledge. Nothing lives on your local computer. It lives in the cloud. Everything is shared. You get hit by a truck tomorrow, the client project needs to still move forward. You decide to leave, the project still needs to move forward. And as the owner, you can't get so attached that you think, that you become fully dependent on, not that the person's not important, but that you can't find someone else for that place. And so you've got to build the position, and you got to build the company to be resilient and be able to weather those kinds of shifts and changes. That is really hard to do. I don't have a formula. I don't have like a pithy saying that I can like throw out there that,
Right.
Other than to be aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because some business owners really get freaked out. Like, they lose somebody and they're like, what do I do?
I think, we've had it before where we've lost people, not by choice, but by happenstance, economic downturns, things like that. And, maybe a year or two before you thought, man, how could we have ever survived? And then after it happens, you're like, actually, that was a blessing in disguise. I didn't realize, that there was more room to grow here, or, this person's skill set held us back, or your attitude about it. Or, it's funny because sometimes when people are gone, your past clients or current clients or trade partners will be like, oh, this, that, and another thing.
Yeah. And you're like, why didn't you tell me?
Exactly. Like what did you get, did someone lock you up? You couldn't say anything.
Yeah.
And so it's funny how, and I think just that perspective as you get older, honestly, I would extend that to the owner. To think that you're not replaceable is a grave mistake as well. And to keep on innovating yourself and the things that you bring in, or if you're going to try to grow and sell the company, obviously you have to create a system. I think that's what you were meant by, in the business, on the business, own the business. Once you own the business, now you have an asset and you could actually sell it because there's a process, and things like that, which does make, if you don't have land and a lot of other assets, it is hard to build a construction company, or sell a construction company, or so I'm told.
It is.
And so, I wish someone had told me that, 20 years ago. Hey, Dad, if you're listening, that would have been helpful 20 years ago. But the point of it is nobody tells you that when you start, right? I mean, you started on a lot of passion and a lot of creativity, and away you go. And very few, and this goes back to the plan thing. If you were thinking about the end in mind in the beginning, there's be so many things you would do differently. I mean, I know for myself, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah. So knowing that you're replaceable as the owner, so important and so liberating. Once you get there and you're like, I could be replaced. That wouldn't be a bad thing.
Or like, I'll let you finish. Go ahead.
No.
Well, like vacation, I've heard before too, that like, a lot of owners think, well, if I miss an email, if I'm gone a week, and I think as you have kids and you start to prioritize schedule and you prioritize, there's certain things in your life that help bring clarity to this. And I'll just share this personal story that is something aspirational that I want to do. And two things. One, I do send a lot of emails, and the best comment I've ever heard about getting less emails is send less emails. So I'm guilty of that myself. Okay. So that's check number one. Number two is, have you ever found that when you leave, magically your inbox isn't actually as bad as you think it's going to be? Because somehow it's like, how did everyone know I was sort of gone? And like, turns out they didn't really need you and they're just fine. And if you keep solving other people's problems as the owner, then you will always be stuck solving their problems for all time. And then I guess the last thing I'll say on this is like, if you can't build your business in a way that you could be gone for a week, 2 weeks, a month, or whatever your goal is. And I don't think IBM does it anymore, but years ago, I think it was like every 7 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever it was, they did a forced 6-month sabbatical. Or maybe it was a year.
Oh, okay.
Which I think is genius.
Yeah.
You get into, back then let's call it IBM, the whatever that was, and it's a great company and was then is now. But like the point of it is like they made you leave because they realized that after 20 years, there's so many things that, you could go,
you had your routine. You were just in a routine.
Yes,
you're just doing.
You need to break it up, and you'd be a better employee and person by doing it after. And the reason I bring this up is my wife and I have talked about it. My kid, we're not ready yet. We're probably 7-8 years away from doing this. But I remember we took 4 months off one summer when I was a kid. We traveled to Europe, and I didn't live in China or Japan for 7 years or 5 years. But the idea is like, it doesn't have to be Europe. It could be anywhere. You could go camping, you go to the Boundary Waters, you could build a cabin in South America. You could, build a house. I would love to volunteer in a third world country and do something. I couldn't just vacation for a year. I'd go crazy. I'd need it
for sure.
And for me personally. And so, but it's something I also want to expose my kids to, travel and these things. But if you can't build the business in a way that it can survive without you, I can't realize that dream. And so that's sort of a dream that I have that I now have to sort of back up with some operational things. And just because it's a way doesn't mean I can't start working on it now.
Yeah. So you said exactly what I was going to say as my second point, which is perfect, which was stepping away from the business is the other thing that you've got to learn to do. And it was, I want to say it was like 2002 thereabouts. And my wife at the time said, you got to figure out a way to dial work back, and you got to figure out a way to step away for a period of time. And it was that same mindset. And so the first was a week of no phone and no email. And that was very, very, very hard to do, putting somebody else in charge. And then the next year it was a month.
No email and no.
I had an emergency email, and I had one person in the company had it, and if it was like, if you absolutely, it's like an emergency.
Yeah. Where did you go, or where were you? Were you here locally in Minnesota still, or you were traveling?
Traveled. One of the trips went to Peru, Bolivia, Chile.
Amazing.
I traveled all around there. Another one of the trips was going back to China and traveling all around there again, eating good food.
Love this.
Yes. And so also difficult to reach me, right? And what it showed me when I came back was, yes, I was not as needed as I thought, which was huge, but also the parts of the company that really needed to be worked on were now very, very clear. And I was so out of the day-to-day that I could see very clearly where the pain points were in the company so that I could go and be useful fixing and tweaking those and all of the areas where I was actually not needed. And we came up with this theory called mastering the gray, which is about building in systems and protocols for all the stuff that is buildable for, like you answer the phone on the second ring. This is what you say. Right? These are the things that are easy to write down. And if you do that, then you've got all this bandwidth for the stuff that's really like the last 20% that's impossible to build systems for, but now you've got the bandwidth for it.
You're talking about habit stacking. I mean, essentially you're doing, if you do a habit, you don't have to think about it. If every single morning you get up and run 1 mile, 5 miles, whatever it is, after a while, it's no longer a choice. It's part of your habit. And, anyway, that's an extreme example, but like again, going back to this book I'm listening to with Michael Jordan, he would step onto the court every time. He would start with chest passes. The greatest player that's ever played basketball would do a rudimentary chest pass because that was his habit before the game. He would he would take a new pair of shoes and lace them up new every single time out of the box because that was his habit. And, the second ring, this is part of the day I answer emails, whatever it is. If you start, you're going to create more time because now you're not thinking about what to do.
Yeah. And you build it for your team, right?
Yes.
You build their habits in for them so that now they're all functioning and they're flowing with the same.
How do you get buy-in from your team? Because, you might have a great idea. I might have a great idea. How do you empower them to have a great ideas, but also because it might work for you and I, but what if they don't want to do it?
I mean, I'm a benevolent dictator, I'd say. This is
that is the best. I think my wife is also a benevolent dictator. Sorry, honey.
Yeah. But so I will add, I kind of semi-retired for 2 years. I mean, I got to the point where I'd started my consulting firm, Verified Green. I was traveling around the country on the speaker circuit, doing green building, high performance building science education. I was working for Department of Energy on the Build America research team. I had I would say, and I was skiing. I got divorced and became a ski bum for 3 months and traveled around Colorado. And I put in, I say 2 to 4 hours a month into the business. And it was great for 2 years. And then I realized, like you talked about at the beginning of the show, culture matters. And I had built systems and processes for everything except for culture. And there was an erosion of culture that was starting to take root, and it became a bigger thing, and we had to let some people go and make some changes. But it became really clear that the owner's job, not necessarily to dictate the day-to-day, or definitely not to dictate the day-to-day, and definitely not to be involved in most projects, but to help set the tone for culture, or to hire someone to set the tone for culture and to pay attention to it. It's like finger on the wheel, but you still have to look at the road and have your finger on the wheel. There's got to be somebody that you put in place, or you yourself have to be that tone, or that voice that just helps keep that culture side alive. So that was one of my big mistakes that I learned.
Like I said, we're definitely having you back on. There's way too much you and I have to talk about. Plus our cameras didn't work, which is fine as long as the recording works. One of the things that I guess 2 questions I have, I should have asked at the beginning. Where did the original name of the company, Otagawa, come from?
Sure. So my first ex-wife was Japanese.
Okay.
And I hyphenated my last name because I was, progressive thinking dude, and named the company after my last name. Like a lot of people use their names for their companies, which also you should never do. It's terrible.
Agreed.
Terrible idea.
100% agree. I wish, again, someone had told me, hey, don't name it after your name. It makes it impossible to sell.
Yeah. So that's where the name comes from.
Okay.
We used to tell people when they'd ask about, where's Otagawa? Do I get to meet Otagawa? We'd say, the Tourette's, we just keep him locked up in the basement. He's bad with people.
So now it's O&A. All right. I guess last question is, what are you excited about for, this year? So up and coming. That's
Oh,
got you
man.
kind of excited.
This year is, well, we're remodeling the Pillsbury Castle. That's very exciting. That's the ASAD Showcase House, and we're in this very unique position where we are managing 7 remodelers under us and 15 designers,
Oh, wow.
which in a $7 million, 10,000 square foot, 110-year-old castle. So that's a fun
I
project.
don't even know where that is. Where is that?
It's across the street from the Minnesota Institute of Arts.
Okay.
In the Whittier neighborhood. So super cool project, really exciting, a lot of fun, but definitely one of a kind, and good fun for us. And I turned 50, so trying to think of something fun. I wanted to go skiing in Afghanistan because why not? But my wife put the kibosh on that and said that
It might be one of those missing hikers. Actually, my sister was in Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan during a Civil War rock climbing, and she had to bribe some Russian guards to get off to get on the airplane and to get out of the country. Cool. And they wanted to go to Afghanistan rock climbing, but just previously there had been some rock climbers that were they might still be in Afghanistan. It's not a very, your wife probably made a good call on that.
Yeah,
one.
she's definitely the.
Are you doing backcountry skiing then as well?
So yeah, I just got back I was in Whistler for a week, and then I was up in Montana for a couple days.
Whitefish or where?
I skied whitefish and blacktail both. Yeah. And great powder day. And my 10-year-old is at the point where we can put him on a good black, and he can ski through the powder and the moguls and keep up. And
that's awesome. So I lived out there for 25 years. So I shouldn't say that. We had a cabin there for 25 years. We'd go 1 week in the winter and 1 week in the summer. So I did my first ultra marathon last summer up Whitefish Mountain. So where you ski, you run up from Whitefish.
Yeah, I saw the little trail markers.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what we ran. And anyway, I saw one of my friends who actually organizes the whole thing at IBS at the International Builder Show last week, and I saw you there as well. So I
had my fall raven pants on.
Yeah, exactly. We got a lot to catch up on off air here. So I was there for Pella's innovation, and I was working closely with Pella. You were at the display booth right across. What were you doing? I saw that you were doing some stuff right in the outdoor exhibit there.
Yeah, so that's protradecraft.com. So I also work for SGC Horizon, which owns Pro Builder, Pro Remodeler magazines. I used to write for Hanley Wood back when Sal Alfano was running Remodeling magazine. And we have a show called the Building Resilience Show. We just are finishing filming season 3, and we're going to start filming season 4 of that. You can find that on YouTube. It's exciting. And there's a big education portal that's being launched. I think it's called Construction Pros Academy. Lots of tutorials, how-to videos, kind of like we talked about. And yes, Pella launched a new product. Super excited about. We're hoping to get them into one of the shows and show off.
I got to check out to the IG channel, but I got to race Jesse Kath because they had the 2 speed clocks up there.
Yes.
And so it was all about I've installed 2 windows in my life, and they're both last week.
Nice.
And I'm not sure they would hold out water, but man, was I fast.
We had a skills challenge on our stage, and we had someone install one in 51 seconds.
The Pella window?
Yeah.
51
seconds.
Wow.
But we're not going to talk about the window today.
Yeah.
But there's lots to talk about.
That innovation is pretty legit. It'd be interesting to see if they license it to other window manufacturers.
That was what I asked.
So I'm pretty well connected with Pella, and I said that would be amazing. And they said they want to see how it goes first over the next 6 months to a year. But I'm going to have one of the innovators on the podcast. So I met someone from the R&D department. That was 4 years in the making, and I think it'd be really cool to talk about just the amount of innovation and time and patents and how now that I look at a window. So I was on a site last week where I was filming, and they've got 26 nails on the exterior nailing flange. It's like 13 minutes versus 3 minutes. So like, this is crazy. And now that the Pella has come out with this, this cool clip on the inside, it's 12 screws versus 26. And you're like, wow, not only are you saving time, resources, but one person can do it versus a team. I just feel like there's some huge things that can be done with that.
There is, and there's a bunch of stuff that Pella did that they didn't know that they did when they did this on the building performance side. The most notable being because the attachment's on the inside and there's no shims because they're structural brackets. There's no, when you go to insulate around the window, there's no
that thermal
interruptions.
Yeah.
But the other thing they did is because the structural attachment is on the inside for exterior insulation, because it's an adjustable bracket. So you've got 2 inches of insulation on the outside. You're not fastening your window through all that. Now you can extend the window out to the face of the foam or the face of the
Yep,
sheathing if you're
yep.
using zip bar, and there's no penetrations. So there's no, the thermal break is gone. There's no need for thermal bucks or any kind of bucking of the windows. You can deal with all the insulation changes that are coming to the building codes. There's no shimming, which is huge. And then the flange on most windows isn't a watertight seal. And so you have to, when you tape a window, you have to get the tape onto the unit, the frame of the unit. And most window installers don't know that. We see that defect all the time. But the flange that they built, because it needed to be flexible, is heavy rubber.
I mean, it's amazing.
And so it's a watertight flange. Like they solved like 4 problems
unintentionally. But I mean, that's the whole point of innovation, right?
It's cool.
Is on the way to path one thing, you solve 5 other things.
Smokes.
And they're going to do a great work with it. Well, we'll have all your websites in our show notes as well.
Cool.
Thank you very much for coming on. Appreciate your time. And anyway, we'll see you next time.
It was a pleasure.
Very good.
We're excited to announce that our first live event is now on sale on our website. On May 16th at 5 o'clock in the North House in Minneapolis, the Curious Builder is going to be hosting Brad Levitt, Nick Schiffer, Tyler Grace, and Morgan Molitor to a panel discussion about networking, marketing your brand and your business, and all things related to the Contractor Coalition, which is coming to Minneapolis on May 15th through May 19th. If you're looking at leveling up your business, I'd highly recommend attending. For those local here in Minnesota, it's right in your backyard. This would be an amazing time to network with some of the nation's best builders with the best building practices around. Join us for the Contractor Coalition, or if you just want to be there for one night and enjoy the networking and meet these superstars from around the country, again, that is going to be May 16th at 5 o'clock at the North House. Tickets can be bought at the contractorcoalitionsummit.com as well as the CuriousBuilderPodcast.com.
The Curious Builder is proud to announce that on our website, we now have a shop or a merch page. If you want to support the show, it really makes a big difference. A lot of people over the years have asked, how can we support your show? We really appreciate the content. So head to the CuriousBuilderPodcast.com, go to the shop page, and right now the shirts will be on sale for pre-order until May 1st. It's the only time we're going to do it. So if you want your limited edition shirt, head there now, and we appreciate the support. Thanks for listening to the Curious Builder Podcast. If you like what you listen to, please give us a 5-star rating and write us a review. It really means a lot. It's a great way for us to just understand what you like about the podcast and what we can keep doing. So like and review, and please share with your friends and family. Find out more at CuriousBuilderPodcast.com.